The woman was despised by her mother-in-law because of her poor family background. After finally conceiving a child, she was brutally beaten by her mother-in-law. The mother-in-law even tried every possible means to force Xianmi to miscarry. She believed a daughter-in-law carrying the bloodline of the poor had no right to bear children for wealthy families like theirs. Xianmi had once believed in love, lured by her husband's sweet talk, but her mother-in-law vehemently opposed the marriage of the impoverished Xianmi into their family. Fearing his girlfriend would leave him, Taemin pressured her into an unplanned pregnancy. Left with no choice, Xianmi reluctantly married him. Yet after the wedding, Haesuk treated Xianmi as a wicked woman. She was convinced Xianmi must have used unscrupulous means to bewitch her son, so Haesuk treated Xianmi like a servant in the household. Even while pregnant, her mother-in-law didn't spare her. All the laundry and cooking were dumped on Xianmi alone. Her sister-in-law Jaihai also tormented her relentlessly. On Xianmi's birthday, the in-laws didn't prepare anything for her, which was bad enough. Jaihai even insinuated Xianmi was a thief because her necklace had gone missing. Haesuk and her daughter assumed Xianmi, coming from a poor background, must have a habit of stealing. Knowing protesting was futile, Xianmi forced a smile and endured it. Taemin, a mama's boy, never spoke up for Xianmi. Xianmi endured the humiliation and went to the kitchen to serve them rice. Haesuk still wouldn't let it go. She even sent the maid to search Xianmi's room, and since the child was born, Haesuk had become even more outrageous. She believed this poor girl had no right to be her granddaughter's mother. Not only did she constantly badmouth Xianmi in front of her granddaughter, she never allowed Xianmi to bond with the child. Behind the scenes, Haesuk secretly arranged a matchmaking meeting between her son and a wealthy young woman. Taemin, showing some backbone, refused to heed his mother's orders this time, but Xianmi discovered the truth. Enduring their humiliation and abuse, Xianmi served them diligently for 4 years without complaint. Yet Haesuk remained fixated on driving her out of the house. Xianmi finally snapped and demanded a divorce from her husband. Under her intense pressure, he reluctantly agreed, but Haesuk and her daughter started scheming again. They conceded the divorce, but demanded Xianmi pay them compensation for emotional distress. Haesuk completely forgot who had served them all these years. Xianmi declared that she could leave with nothing but insisted on taking her daughter Lucy. She knew her money-obsessed mother-in-law, blind to right and wrong, would corrupt the child. Haesuk, favoring sons over daughters, dismissed Lucy as just a girl who can't carry on the family line and handed her over. Had her son not intervened, Haesuk would have even extorted a divorce penalty from Xianmi. From then on, Xianmi struggled to raise her child alone. Haesuk even forbade her son from paying a single penny in child support. At her lowest point, Xianmi met a man named Soo-hyun. Not only was Soo-hyun handsome, but he came from a wealthier family than Taemin. He frequently took Xianmi to high-end venues Taemin himself couldn't even enter. Every gift Soo-hyun bought for Xianmi was from an international luxury brand. Before long, Xianmi fell deeply in love with Soo-hyun, but Soo-hyun's family refused to accept Xianmi bringing her child into their marriage. Xianmi found herself in a dilemma. She couldn't bear to part with herself, yet she couldn't abandon her daughter either. At this moment, Soo-hyun promised that once they had their own child, they could bring Lucy into their family. Lost in love, Xianmi once again trusted her boyfriend's promise. Ultimately, she chose to leave her daughter behind at her parents' home. Lucy clung desperately, begging her mother not to leave herself. Yet Xianmi, for the sake of love, heartlessly abandoned her daughter. However, life in the upper echelons was never destined to be easy. Though Xianmi's current mother-in-law wasn't as fierce as Haesuk, she treated Xianmi as nothing more than a tool for bearing children. She forced Xianmi to drink various foul-tasting concoctions. Moreover, the wealthy household had many rules. Xianmi had to pay respects to her in-laws morning, noon, and night. Whenever her in-laws or husband left or returned home, Xianmi had to bow and see them off or welcome them. The rigid in-laws believed a daughter-in-law should endure everything without complaint. They ordered Xianmi to wash clothes and cook alongside the household servants. Apart from the absence of beatings, Xianmi's married life remained identical to before. Now residing in a larger house, Xianmi actually had more household chores to manage. Her in-laws forbade her from contacting her daughter, insisting that, since she was now part of their family, her top priority should be bearing them a healthy baby boy to carry on the family line. To secure one's position, Seonmi had no choice but to temporarily sever ties with one's daughter. Lucy was mocked by classmates as an orphan after her parents' divorce. Seonmi rarely had time to visit her. Lucy grew deeply resentful toward her mother. Haesuk took advantage of the situation. She frequently had her son bring Lucy home, using the opportunity to tell Lucy it was all because Seonmi had changed her heart. She even said Seonmi would never love her again. At 6 years old, Lucy gradually developed hatred toward her birth mother under her grandmother's manipulation. Seonmi endured nausea daily, consuming numerous folk remedies and fertility drugs to boost her chances of conceiving. Having not visited her daughter for over a month, Seonmi decided to go to her parents' home to see Lucy. This deeply displeased her mother-in-law. "You haven't given our family a grandson, yet you think only of visiting the daughter you bore to another man." Though Mrs. Lee refrained from verbal scolding, her coldness towards Seonmi was palpable. Arriving at her parents' home, Seonmi brought her daughter's favorite cookies. Lucy, however, met her mother with icy indifference. Seonmi awkwardly stroked her daughter's head. Lucy, annoyed, pulled away. At bedtime, Seonmi pleaded for her daughter to understand herself. She promised to take Lucy away in 2 years. Lucy retorted impatiently, "I have a dad. Why do I have to live with uncle? Dad is getting married. The new mom is a kind person." Hearing her daughter call another woman mom tore at Seonmi's heart. She could only say, "Grandma gets angry easily and scares Lucy." Lucy countered, "Grandma only gets angry at you because you're a bad woman who abandoned her husband and daughter and isn't honest. Grandma is very kind to the new mom." Seonmi never imagined her daughter would see herself this way. Her sister then berated her, calling her a bad mother. "If you don't have time to care for Lucy, why not send her back to Taemin?" Her sister's scorn pushed Seonmi to the brink. The next day, Taemin also came to visit his daughter. Lucy instantly lit up and threw herself into her father's arms. This stark difference in treatment made Seonmi even more heartbroken. Seonmi arranged to meet her ex-husband, hoping her former mother-in-law would stop speaking ill of her in front of the child. Taemin, however, also accused Seonmi of being a bad mother. He demanded she hand over custody of the child to him. Seonmi completely broke down. She didn't want to sever ties with her daughter. Back home, Seonmi shared this with her husband, but Soohyun strongly agreed to send Lucy to Taemin. After all, no man wants to raise someone else's child. He had completely forgotten his own promise. Seonmi was furious upon hearing her husband's words. News of Seonmi meeting her ex-husband reached his current girlfriend. To prevent their reconciliation, Hyami went to her mother-in-law to complain. Haesuk exploded upon learning Seonmi dared contact her son. She stormed to Seonmi's parents' home, furious to see her daughter. Seonmi had to lie to her mother-in-law, claiming her father was ill. That day, Seonmi returned to her parents' home again, using the same excuse of her father's illness. Seonmi planned a trip with her daughter to mend their strained relationship, yet Lucy remained exceptionally cold towards Seonmi. Instead, she chattered happily on the phone with her father throughout the journey. She showed no regard for Seonmi's feelings. Even when talking to Seonmi, every sentence revolved around her dad. Seonmi's heart was shattered by Lucy's indifference. No sooner had they arrived at their destination than Lucy threw a tantrum, demanding to go back to her father. She declared that she absolutely refused to spend time alone with her mother. This pushed Seonmi to finally voice her grievances toward her daughter. Seonmi believed she had sacrificed enough for Lucy. She had walked away from her marriage with nothing for her daughter's sake. Despite her in-laws' opposition, she had maintained contact with Lucy all these years. She had even promised to bring Lucy to live with her in a few years. But Seonmi didn't know that 6-year-old Lucy, influenced by her grandmother, had long seen Seonmi as a bad woman who would abandon her child for a man. Lucy believed her parents' impending divorce was entirely her mother's fault. She also feared that if Seonmi had other children, she would abandon her again. Thus, Lucy declared she hated her mother intensely. She would rather regard her stepmother as one's own real mother than call Seonmi mom again. Seonmi spoke with deep sorrow. As a woman, can't a mother have her own happiness? Though one's children were important, one's own life mattered too. Lucy refused to engage with Seonmi any longer. Returning home in distress, Seonmi still forced a smile to wash clothes and cook meals to please her mother-in-law. Just then, she received news that her ex-mother-in-law had stormed into her home causing a scene. She felt deeply guilty about her mother's plight but dared not seek justice, because someone like Haesuk would surely slander her as a wicked woman and make it known to everyone. Her current in-laws were already dissatisfied with her being remarried. If they discovered she still maintained contact with her ex-husband and daughter, they would surely kick her out. Having tasted the life of a wealthy wife, Seonmi couldn't bear to give up her current privileged existence. Ultimately, Seonmi decided to send her daughter back to her ex-husband. After all, her daughter already hated her. She couldn't afford to lose her status as a wealthy wife. Lucy climbed into her father's car without hesitation and left, just as ruthlessly as Seonmi had abandoned her back then. Back home, Seonmi intended to drown her sorrows in alcohol, but her mother-in-law and aunt forbade her from drinking. They insisted she must bear them a healthy baby boy. Alcohol would lower her chances of conception and harm the fetus's health. Seonmi swallowed her humiliation and retreated to her room, seeking solace from her husband. Instead, he stumbled home drunk, ignoring her entirely. Soohyun bore none of the tenderness he'd shown when courting Seonmi. After enduring the humiliation of tending to her husband until he fell asleep, Seonmi drowned her sorrows in drink to alleviate the gloom in oneself. She remained unaware that her husband had fallen in love with another woman. That day, Hae-suk shockingly called Mrs. Lee to slander Seonmi as a wicked woman. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Lee lashed out at Seonmi without restraint. She ordered Seonmi never to meet her ex-husband privately again, nor to secretly see her daughter. Seonmi felt deeply wronged but dared not utter a single complaint. Hae-suk's actions were entirely instigated by her current daughter-in-law. Hyami was the carefully chosen prospective daughter-in-law Hae-suk had handpicked, but Taemin still loved Seonmi and refused to marry Hyami. Hyami, however, refused to let go of such an outstanding man as Taemin, so she went to Taemin's mother to complain. Hae-suk believed it must be that wicked woman Seonmi persistently clinging to her son. To sever all contact between them, she called Seonmi's current in-laws. Hae-suk didn't want her son to miss out on Hyami, this gentle, virtuous, sensible, and obedient woman, so she feigned illness to force her son into marrying Hyami. Helpless against his unreasonable mother, Taemin had no choice but to marry Hyami. Yet the gentle, virtuous daughter-in-law Hae-suk envisioned revealed her true colors immediately after the wedding. Hyami had once promised to treat Lucy like her own daughter, but upon discovering Lucy still treasured a wedding photo of her birth parents, she flew into a rage. She even made Lucy wait outside in the freezing wind for 2 hours. This vicious woman Hyami lied, claiming Lucy had only waited a few minutes. Unexpectedly, her actions were exposed by the family's housekeeper. Using oneself as mistress of the house, Hyami viciously threatened the housekeeper not to meddle. Having worked in the household for 50 years, even the wicked mother-in-law respected her to some extent. Now, accused by the malicious new daughter-in-law of lacking discretion, the nanny was so enraged she fell ill. Jae-hye intended to reprimand Hyami but was instead scolded by her mother. Clearly, Hae-suk had already accepted the feigned obedient Hyami as a good daughter-in-law. Only now did Jae-hye finally recall Seonmi's kindness. Meanwhile, Hyami still sought to quickly conceive a child to compete with Lucy for the family inheritance. Taemin, however, persistently refused to consummate the marriage with her. Unexpectedly, Hyami even tattled to her mother-in-law about this. Hae-suk, being peculiar herself, saw nothing wrong with Hyami airing their marital secrets. She even ordered her son to consummate the marriage with Hyami. Unbeknownst to her, the carefully chosen daughter-in-law coveted only their family fortune. Hyami had previously divorced her ex-husband for being too poor. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee harbored deep dissatisfaction with Seonmi as her daughter-in-law. Seonmi desperately tried to conceive quickly, only to stumble upon her husband's text messages with another woman. Yet Seonmi owed her comfortable life entirely to her in-laws. Even after discovering her husband's affair, she dared not press further. In her past, though her birth family was poor, her parents had doted on her endlessly. Now, she was forced to do mountains of housework daily and attend classes to learn how to cook her in-laws' favorite dishes. All she received in return was her husband's heartless betrayal. Seonmi now recalls her sister's warning. When she insisted on remarrying, her sister urged her to investigate Soohyun's romantic history. After all, wealthy young men rarely turn out to be good partners. She shouldn't foolishly marry Soohyun just because he's rich. But back then, Seonmi was blinded by love. She even thought her sister's well-meaning advice stemmed from jealousy over her marrying into wealth. Seonmi discovered the woman contacting her husband was a celebrity. She sought out a paparazzi who frequently followed the actress. From him, she learned the actress and Soohyun had been in constant contact. Heartbroken, Seonmi still refused to divorce. She begged the reporter to help conceal their affair. Fed up with her husband's hypocrisy, Seonmi finally decided to confront him openly. Yet her husband stubbornly denied everything. Even when Seonmi stated she had seen the text messages, He continued to justify himself with righteous indignation, accusing Seonmi of being overly suspicious. Seonmi was utterly disillusioned with her husband. At this point, her mother-in-law also learned of the affair, but predictably, she sided with her son. She ordered Seonmi to keep it secret from her father-in-law, because he despised unfaithful men most of all. If he discovered Soo-hyun's transgression, he would surely expel him from the family. Mrs. Lee even declared with righteous indignation that a twice-divorced woman like Seonmi marrying into their wealthy family was a blessing from a past life. Their family provided Seonmi with a life of luxury. Therefore, Seonmi must learn to swallow her pride and turn a blind eye to her son's mistakes. Besides, all men make mistakes. Mrs. Lee believed women should tolerate men prone to error. Society would blame Seonmi's 2 divorces, not her son's faults. She warned Seonmi to choose between settling for a miserable existence or being cast out. Seonmi bitterly regretted abandoning her 6-year-old daughter to marry into wealth. Gazing at her daughter's photo, she wept with remorse. Yet Seonmi ultimately refuses to relinquish her privileged life. She humbly pleads with the actress to step aside, but her submissive entreaties only embolden the actress. The actress shamelessly declares that a twice-divorced, childbearing woman from a poor family like Seonmi is unworthy of Soo-hyun. She arrogantly vows not only to stay but to force Seonmi and Soo-hyun to divorce. Seonmi was stunned by the actress's shamelessness. The actress sneered contemptuously at Seonmi's pathetic state. Soo-hyun made a mistake, yet you chose to forgive him? She showed no remorse for driving another couple to divorce. Never having endured such humiliation, Seonmi was nearly choked with rage. After leaving the actress's home, Seonmi broke down in tears, overwhelmed by injustice. She knew the actress's arrogance stemmed entirely from Soo-hyun's indulgence. Seonmi refused to endure a life of constant compromise and her husband's contempt. Weary of her marriage, she resolved to rekindle her dream of being one's own TV host. So Seonmi filed for divorce, a decision that infuriated her mother-in-law. A divorce among such elite families would instantly trend on social media. If the truth leaked, it could even cause the company's stock to plummet. Her mother-in-law firmly refused to agree to the divorce, insisting their family had been generous enough. Seonmi, a poor woman with a child from a previous marriage, should be eternally grateful to them. How dare she even suggest divorce? She was utterly ungrateful. Mrs. Lee's opposition forced Seonmi to temporarily abandon her divorce plans, but she could never forgive her husband. She returned directly to her parents' home. Here, Seonmi couldn't help but recall her ex-husband's kindness. Taemin had no flaws beyond being a mama's boy. He had never betrayed her. Even after their divorce, he still loved her. For her sake, he could even ignore his new wife. Seonmi couldn't help but regret her decision to divorce. Had she endured her mother-in-law and sister-in-law's torment and stayed with her ex-husband, she would surely be happier now. Meanwhile, Lucy desperately missed her biological mother. She had finally witnessed the terror of her stepmother. Driven by jealousy over Taemin's lingering feelings for Seonmi, Hyami frequently beat and scolded Lucy in private. To sever all ties between Taemin and Seonmi, Hyami forbade Lucy from contacting her grandparents or Seonmi. She constantly prevented Taemin from bonding with Lucy. Whenever Taemin told Lucy bedtime stories to lull her to sleep, Hyami would deliberately call him away. She even taunted Lucy by announcing plans to give her a little brother or sister. At 6 years old, Lucy finally understood that a stepmother could never replace a real mother. Seonmi returned to her parents' home and confessed her husband's transgressions. Yet her parents, who had always doted on Seonmi, did not support her decision to divorce this time, because Seonmi had already been divorced once. Another divorce would inevitably invite gossip and judgment. Moreover, Seonmi currently had no job. For a 30-year-old woman in Korea, finding employment was harder than climbing to the moon. Without the comfortable life provided by her in-laws, Seonmi would inevitably fall into hardship. Her mother urged Seonmi to make do. If he's only made one mistake and is begging for forgiveness, just forgive him. Her father also advised Seonmi to swallow her pride. Mrs. Lee equals to prevent her errant son from being kicked out by her husband. She humbly begged Seonmi's father to persuade her daughter. She promised that she would severely discipline herself and give Seonmi a proper explanation. Seonmi's father was blinded by Mrs. Lee's superficial kindness. He believed that with such an impartial and reasonable mother-in-law, Seonmi's life in her in-laws' home must be blissful. After all, Soo-hyun had only committed a mistake every man in the world might make. Hearing her father's words, Seonmi felt utterly hopeless. She had sacrificed everything for this marriage. Now, having finally awakened, She was being asked to revert to being a housewife. Depressed, Seonmi sought out her sister and friends to vent her frustrations. Surprisingly, both her sister and friends advised her to endure the humiliation. That evening, Soo-hyun came back again, kneeling on the floor and desperately begging Seonmi to forgive him this one time. He promised he would change his ways completely. Looking at the man she once deeply loved, Seonmi ultimately relented. She felt that rather than struggling through a difficult life after divorce, it was better to just muddle through with her husband. Seonmi returned to her in-laws' home. Mrs. Lee began to feel a hint of guilt towards Seonmi. She rarely made Seonmi do housework anymore. Seonmi's life improved significantly compared to before, but the emotional bond between the couple could never be restored to what it once was. Yet her husband only wanted to have a child quickly to fulfill his parents' wish of holding a grandchild. Seonmi felt nothing but disgust. If this incident hadn't happened, she would have gladly given her husband an heir. But now, they could never go back to how things were. "I'm not your doll. I'm a human being. I need your respect." Soo-hyun angrily demanded his wife stop ignoring his feelings. They had a huge fight. Seonmi forbade Soo-hyun from touching her again. Yet Soo-hyun still had the nerve to get angry, believing oneself to have not only provided Seonmi with a life of luxury, and even humbled himself to kneel and apologize. He felt he'd sacrificed enough for Seonmi. After all, men marry wives just to display them like ornaments. Which man doesn't play around with other men's wives? They all swallow their pride. Only Seonmi makes a big deal out of nothing and even wants a divorce. Seonmi finally saw her husband's true colors. But during their Cold War, the actress called. Seonmi could no longer tolerate the actress's audacity. She tracked down the actress's residence once more and urged her to give up her hopes. Even if she hadn't married her husband, her mother-in-law would never permit a woman like her who'd slept with who knows how many men to enter their prestigious family. The actress knew full well that someone like oneself, from the entertainment industry, could never be accepted by such a wealthy clan. But she refused to give up. Frustrated by the actress's stubbornness, Seonmi could do nothing but return home. Mrs. Lee, however, immediately reprimanded Seonmi without explanation. She believed that as the daughter-in-law of a top-tier wealthy family, personally confronting an outsider was utterly disgraceful. Seonmi reflected on her life, unable to fathom what colossal mistake one had made in one's first half-life that caused both one's marriages to fail. Meanwhile, journalists swarmed Seonmi's home to cover the scandal the actress had leaked. President Lee, furious, cut off his son's financial support and exiled him to the countryside. Mrs. Lee then unreasonably blamed her daughter-in-law for mishandling the actress situation. As a proper wife, she should have managed everything for her husband. Seonmi didn't try to appease her mother-in-law as she usually did. She had grown utterly disillusioned with this marriage. But Seonmi wasn't the kind of woman to kick someone when they're down. She chose to accompany her husband to the countryside. Only then did Soo-hyun realize Seonmi's true worth and begin reflecting on the mistakes he had made to oneself. He sincerely apologized to Seonmi. Hyami constantly picked on Lucy. When Lucy accidentally spilled juice, Hyami yelled at her until she cried. The nanny told Taemin about this incident. Taemin knew a stepmother could never replace a real mother. Furious, he told Hyami that he didn't expect Hyami to treat Lucy as his own daughter, but begged her not to torment Lucy. Hyami, scolded and convinced that Lucy had tattled, waited until everyone was out to confront Lucy. Lucy tearfully insisted that she had never told on anyone, but Hyami believed Lucy was lying. She berated Lucy, finding her just as irritating as her own mother. She also suspected Lucy's tattling was instigated by Seonmi. Seonmi felt deeply guilty about her daughter's ordeal. Now remarried, Seonmi faced her husband's contempt. Her heart grew cold toward him, yet she unexpectedly discovered she was pregnant. This child was conceived under her husband's coercion. Unable to accept this unwanted pregnancy, Seonmi channeled her loathing for her husband onto the unborn child. Eventually, she sought out her older sister, hoping to secretly arrange an abortion before anyone discovered. But her sister sensed Seonmi's deep-seated reluctance to terminate the pregnancy. She warned that ending it now would haunt Seonmi with lifelong regret. Her sister could only urge Seonmi to carry the child to term after all. The baby was innocent. Moreover, Seonmi's in-laws placed such importance on children. Seonmi could use this child as leverage to secure her standing within her husband's family. For the sake of the child, Seonmi ultimately relented and told her husband about the pregnancy. Yet Soo-hyun saw this child merely as a tool to curry favor with his father. Hearing her husband speak this way, Seonmi felt a pang of disappointment. Soo-hyun vowed again, I won't hurt you anymore. Nothing like that will ever happen again. Trust me. Seonmi knew these were just empty sweet words from her husband, but for the child's sake, she forced herself to believe him once more. After the pregnancy, her in-laws began treating Seonmi like royalty. She lived a life of luxury, with meals served and clothes brought to her. Yet her in-laws also forbade her from leaving the house. Even if she went out, she had to report her whereabouts and couldn't be gone for more than 2 hours. They feared she might accidentally lose the baby. Seonmi felt that, rather than being a daughter-in-law married into this family, she resembled a tool for bearing children. Even when her own mother was injured, her in-laws wouldn't let her visit. They believed bad luck would be passed on to their precious golden grandson. Trapped in this prison-like existence, Seonmi neared a breakdown. Yet she endured divorce was impossible now. She couldn't allow her second child to grow up under the shadow of a stepfather or stepmother. Meanwhile, the actress, seething with jealousy upon learning of Seonmi's pregnancy, resumed her scheming. She produced incriminating photos, blackmailing Seonmi to allow Soohyun one weekly visit. Otherwise, she threatened to expose the photos, turning Soohyun's elite family into a laughingstock among the upper class. Seonmi was utterly speechless at this madwoman's demands. If the scandal broke, the actress would suffer far greater damage. Seonmi found the actress's behavior utterly foolish. It reminded her of oneself sacrificing one's daughter to marry one's husband, only to gain nothing in the end. She had to turn a blind eye to her husband's mistakes for the sake of their child. During Seonmi's pregnancy, her husband couldn't control his wandering eye. Yet the actress remained relentlessly fixated on Soohyun. He'd completely forgotten his vow to love only Seonmi for life. Seonmi, like a fool, was deceived time and again, yet still labored to bear her husband's children. The next day, Soohyun regained some conscience. Out of guilt, he not only bought Seonmi a gemstone bracelet and began sending her flowers after work, he also gave her a large sum of spending money, and would even blow-dry her hair after her baths. The once macho Soohyun would never have lowered himself to curry favor with Seonmi. Sure enough, men only treat their wives well when they've done something wrong. Her husband's sudden tenderness left Seonmi bewildered. Seonmi couldn't shake the feeling her husband was hiding something. Soohyun shamelessly claimed all his actions stemmed from loving Seonmi too much. Seonmi, convinced her husband had just made a mistake, temporarily set aside her suspicions. Their relationship rapidly warmed due to Soohyun's sudden attentions. Fearing Taemin and Seonmi might rekindle their old feelings, Hyami strictly forbade Lucy from contacting Seonmi. Lucy yearned deeply for Seonmi. Meanwhile, Hyami, seeking to drive a wedge between Taemin and Lucy's father-daughter bond, feigned affection toward Lucy. She took over the task of reading stories to Lucy to put her to sleep. However, Hyami's storytelling was half-hearted and devoid of emotion. Lucy was so disturbed she couldn't sleep. She told her father that she didn't want to listen to stories read to her by oneself. Taemin remained unaware of Hyami's assault on Lucy, believing Lucy was simply rejecting Hyami. He urged her to accept her new mother quickly, arguing that being a stepmother was no easy task. Left isolated and helpless, Lucy secretly asked Seonmi to record stories for her using a voice recorder, but Hyami discovered the device. At that moment, it was playing the story of Cinderella. Hyami instantly felt Lucy was subtly mocking her as a wicked stepmother. Furious, she stomped on the recorder right in front of Lucy, crushing it. Lucy was terrified and burst into loud sobs. Meanwhile, Seonmi, unaware of the punishment her stepmother had inflicted on her daughter, continued naively recording storybooks for her daughter. Meanwhile, Seonmi received photos from the actress. She sat in a daze all day. That night, her husband feigned affection, professing his love. Disgusted, Seonmi retched and pulled out the photos. The undeniable evidence was right before her eyes. Yet Soohyun still tried to justify oneself, claiming one had only shared a few drinks with the actress. Seonmi's heart broke completely for her lying husband. She had endured everything for the sake of their child, only to be rewarded with her husband's escalating betrayal. Soohyun didn't even spare their unborn child. Seonmi asked her sister to pick her up from her in-laws' house. Not wanting to worry her parents, she checked into a hotel. Mrs. Lee, thinking it was just a marital spat, scolded Seonmi for being ill-mannered. Running away from home? You're an adult. Seonmi refused to waste words and showed her mother-in-law the photos. Mrs. Lee was instantly speechless. She never imagined her son could be so shameless. She could only thick-skinnedly urge Seonmi to endure it one more time for the child's sake. Seonmi made it clear she would never forgive her husband again. She would raise the child herself. After all, An irresponsible father like him would only corrupt the child. Mrs. Lee warned that if Seonmi insisted on divorce, once the child was born, with her family's influence and status, she'd stand no chance against them in a custody battle. The two parted on bad terms, fearing his father would kick him out. Soo-hyun also came to apologize to Seonmi. But with men, infidelity isn't a one-time thing, it's either never happened or countless times. Seonmi refused to believe her husband's lies anymore. Soo-hyun declared with righteous indignation that this was simply men's nature. 9 out of 10 men were like this, and as a woman, Seonmi should understand men. Furious, Seonmi slapped her husband hard. She had warned her husband not to underestimate oneself. "I tolerated you only because my parents didn't want me to divorce," she said. "But this time, even with the baby, I won't forgive you." Seeing Seonmi's unwavering stance, Soo-hyun slunk away dejectedly. Seonmi's father, upon hearing the news, came to her side. Seonmi clung to her father, weeping bitterly. Indeed, only parents truly cherish their children with all their hearts. That night, sitting alone in the courtyard, her father thought of his daughter, barely 30 years old, already facing 2 divorces. Both times, it happened after she had children. His heart ached, and tears welled up. Seeing her father's sorrow, Seonmi could only comfort him, insisting that it was none of his business and that she was fine. "It's just a divorce. I've been through it before." This only deepened her father's guilt. He blamed himself for his inadequacy, believing it was his fault. Seonmi suffered abuse from her former mother-in-law and contempt from her current husband. Overcome with remorse, he knelt before Seonmi. That day, Lucy was abused again by her stepmother. Ever since Hyami married into the family, Lucy's life had become a living hell. When her father discovered his daughter's abuse, he stormed out and demanded a divorce. But the vicious Hyami saw no wrong in mistreating her stepdaughter, oneself. Instead, she blamed Lucy for speaking ill of her to Taemin, claiming that was why she was getting divorced. Seizing the chance when the in-laws were away, Hyami sought Lucy out to vent her anger. Lucy was already crying from the verbal abuse, but Hyami still wasn't satisfied. She then violently threw Lucy to the ground. Once wasn't enough, she dragged Lucy up and slammed her again. Fortunately, the nanny discovered them in time, preventing Lucy from being seriously injured. Yet Hyami showed no remorse and tried to bribe the nanny with money. The nanny couldn't believe a woman who looked like an angel could be so vicious. She refused Hyami's money and insisted on reporting the incident to the mistress. Hyami's greatest fear was her mother-in-law. She tried to justify oneself, claiming one had only lightly touched Lucy and caused no harm, begging the nanny not to report one's complaint. But Jae-hye returned just then and heard every word of their conversation. One had already disliked Hyami as a woman. One never imagined Hyami would dare to strike their only granddaughter. Yet Hyami still defended oneself with righteous indignation. Jae-hye never imagined anyone could be more vicious than her own mother. Though oneself notorious for one's temper, oneself had never laid a hand on a child. Jae-hye immediately notified her brother and mother. Hae-suk and her son rushed back in a panic. One never expected the virtuous daughter-in-law one had carefully chosen to be such a cruel woman. Hae-suk and her son decided to kick Hyami out. Unexpectedly, Hyami refused to leave, still not convinced that hitting the child was wrong, even though she held the belief that it was all Lucy's fault for spreading rumors about her to her in-laws. Meanwhile, Lucy, terrified by her stepmother, dared not leave her room. She hid in her aunt's room, crying secretly. But upon hearing that her father and grandmother planned to kick her stepmother out, Lucy felt a pang of guilt. When Seonmi returned to her in-laws' home to pack her belongings, her mother-in-law shamelessly pleaded once more for Seonmi to forgive her son one last time. But Seonmi knew men never change their ways. She made it clear that oneself would divorce him. Mrs. Lee offered a pitiful compromise: if Seonmi would just give in a little, they would give her parents a villa as compensation. Seonmi loathed her mother-in-law's hypocritical facade most of all. Throughout their marriage, though outwardly polite to her, she had always secretly viewed Seonmi as a gold digger climbing the social ladder. Seonmi had endured her in-laws' contempt because she truly loved her husband. But after being deceived time and again, she felt no lingering attachment to this family. She had no reason left to tolerate their disdain. To win back her husband and mother-in-law's hearts, Hyami put on a show of caring for her stepdaughter Lucy. But Lucy already harbored deep psychological trauma from her stepmother. The sudden display of kindness from her stepmother frightened Lucy so much she couldn't even breathe. Lucy tearfully called her mother Seonmi, begging her to come pick her up. However, Xianmi feared that Lucy becoming too close to herself might provoke resentment from her ex-in-laws. Xianmi's refusal pushed Lucy past the breaking point. Xianmi never imagined this stepmother Hyami would dare to lay a hand on Lucy. The shock nearly caused her to miscarry. Her father urged Xianmi to calm down, suggesting she first understand the full story from her ex-husband before bringing Lucy back. But as a mother, Xianmi had completely lost her reason. She sped all the way to her ex-in-law's house, determined to retrieve her daughter. Haesuk couldn't help but reproach Xianmi. If only Xianmi had endured a little longer back, then Lucy wouldn't have a stepmother and wouldn't have suffered abuse. If she truly couldn't bear to part with the child, she shouldn't have divorced. Though Haesuk despised Xianmi, to prevent her only granddaughter from further harm, she still let Xianmi take Lucy away. But Hyami vehemently refused to let Xianmi take Lucy. She knew that if she let Xianmi snatch custody of Lucy, her mother-in-law and husband would immediately kick her out of the house. Hyami shamelessly declared that oneself was Lucy's mother now, and Xianmi had no right to take Lucy away. Xianmi was nearly laughing in anger at this shameless woman before her. Yet Hyami still had the nerve to call oneself Lucy's mother in front of her. The shameless Hyami even felt wronged, arguing that since one hadn't physically hurt Lucy, why couldn't everyone forgive one? Hyami shamelessly demanded Xianmi's understanding. Xianmi refused to engage with the shameless Hyami any longer and left with Lucy. On the way home, Xianmi asked Lucy with a heavy heart why she hadn't told her about the abuse. Lucy, mature beyond her years, replied, "Only if I say I'm happy will mommy feel happy." Xianmi wept with self-reproach, filled with regret for giving up custody of her daughter to remarry. In the end, it led to her daughter being abused by her stepmother, and oneself ended up being despised by one's husband. Back home, just as Xianmi had put Lucy to sleep, one's ex-husband rushed over. Taemin feared Xianmi and Lucy would be shunned by his wealthy in-laws. He vowed to care for Lucy from now on. Taemin urged Xianmi to let him raise Lucy again, but Xianmi couldn't bear the thought of her daughter sharing a roof with that vicious stepmother. She bluntly revealed her current husband's misconduct and her decision to divorce. This reignited hope in her ex-husband, who had always loved her. Mrs. Lee, wanting her grandson to grow up in a stable family, sought out Xianmi again. She pleaded for Xianmi to forgive her son for the child's sake. But Xianmi believed that if a marriage couldn't offer absolute loyalty and respect from her husband, divorce was preferable. Reluctantly, Mrs. Lee offered terms. If Xianmi returned, they would allow her to bring their daughter to live with them. Additionally, after Xianmi successfully gave birth to a son, they would reward her with a villa. Yet these material concessions could never mend the emotional wounds Xianmi had suffered. Her husband's incorrigible nature would only inflict repeated pain. Xianmi believed cutting losses promptly would benefit everyone. Even the innocent child had been corrupted. Yet President Lee demanded Xianmi give birth and hand the child over to them for raising. Only they could provide the child with a privileged life. Moreover, their son would certainly marry another girl of pure lineage. A child couldn't have two mothers. So if they divorced, Xianmi would never see the child again. Xianmi was stunned by her in-laws' shamelessness, yet she knew that one could not stand against them. Xianmi was in agony. At that moment, Mrs. Lee declared haughtily that they would sign the divorce papers after the child was born. During this period, if Xianmi changed her mind, they might forgive her. Her husband also urged her to accept the situation. Otherwise, if they truly divorced, Xianmi would never again enjoy the life of a wealthy wife. From then on, she could never see the child again. Xianmi was at a loss for what to do. As a mother, she couldn't bear to be separated from her flesh and blood, yet she had already compromised time and again for the child's sake. Xianmi understood that even if she compromised again for the child's sake, it would only lead to her husband becoming even more demanding. Returning to her parents' home and seeing her daughter lifted her gloomy mood somewhat. Xianmi told her daughter she would stay by her side forever. Lucy, thinking her mother was divorcing because of her, was suddenly overcome with guilt. She obediently said she could go back to her father's house, so her mother could live peacefully with her current husband. Lucy insisted she could only be happy if her mother was happy. Her obedience and understanding only deepened Xianmi's guilt. While other children her age were carefree, Lucy had developed a cautious and sensitive nature due to her parents' divorce. Xianmi dreaded the thought of her second child facing the same fate as Lucy. She agonized over it. Must a woman endure humiliation for the sake of her children? Taemin diligently helped Seonmi find an apartment and thoughtfully selected furniture for her. Seonmi felt uncomfortable using her ex-husband's money. Taemin suggested she treat it as a purchase for her daughter. Their harmonious time together felt like a return to their university days of romance. Just then, Soo-hyun called, shamelessly begging Seonmi for forgiveness. But every time Seonmi recalled her husband's actions, anger welled up inside her. To spite him, she deliberately claimed that, on that day, she had gone shopping with oneself and her ex-husband. Soo-hyun exploded with rage, convinced that a man's infidelity was perfectly natural, while Seonmi shopping with oneself and her ex was an unthinkable betrayal. Fuming, Soo-hyun confronted Seonmi, warning her to behave properly or she wouldn't receive a single penny in alimony. Seonmi laughed bitterly at the absurdity of it all. After living with her husband for so long, just one angry remark made him suspect her. Seonmi sarcastically reminded him that not everyone was as shameless as he was, oneself contacting her ex-husband because of their daughter's issues. After that, Seonmi refused to engage with her unreasonable ex-husband and went straight back to her room. No matter how much her in-laws pressured her, Hyami refused to divorce. Hyami felt deeply wronged, insisting she hadn't done anything wrong as a new mother disciplining her stepdaughter. Yet her in-laws absolutely refused to tolerate this vicious woman continuing as their daughter-in-law. Hyami could only grudgingly apologize, begging her husband and mother-in-law for forgiveness. However, Taemin saw right through Hyami's insincere apology. Even now, she didn't believe she'd done anything wrong. Taemin told Hyami not to waste her effort. Desperate to stay, Hyami began a hunger strike. She declared that if her in-laws dared to kick her out, she would starve oneself to death. Hae-suk, who had ruled with an iron fist for 60 years, encountered someone she couldn't intimidate for the first time. She could only gently urge Hyami to find another husband. Seeing her in-laws stubbornly refusing to keep her, Hyami berated them, calling them all scum. Even after oneself humbly apologizing, one's in-laws still cling to one's minor mistakes, refusing to let go. Hae-suk was nearly driven to a heart attack by the fury. Hyami cursed one's mother-in-law, calling her an old hag who only knows how to feign illness. Then, ignoring one's mother-in-law's displeased expression, oneself stormed back to one's room. The next day, Lucy came to visit her father and grandmother. Hearing about Hyami's hunger strike, Lucy, who had been abused herself, set aside past grievances and urged her to eat something. But Hyami, ungrateful, instead threatened Lucy, "Living with your new dad, you'll be abused sooner or later." Lucy innocently explained that Seonmi was getting divorced, so she wouldn't have to live with her new father. Hyami's expression instantly hardened. She believed it was all because her husband wanted to reconcile with his ex-wife that he insisted on kicking her out. Furious, she stormed to Seonmi and cursed her shamelessness. Seonmi watched the woman before her and found it laughable. She declared that she would never reunite with her ex-husband. Instead of scheming to trouble oneself, one would be better off figuring out how to keep one's husband. Yet Seonmi's well-meaning advice only felt like mockery to Hyami. Hyami began downing glass after glass of alcohol. Drunk, she couldn't help but spill the reason behind Lucy's abuse. It turned out Hyami knew her husband still loved his ex-wife, so every time Lucy secretly contacted Seonmi, Hyami feared that Seonmi would reconcile with her husband because of the child. That's why Hyami despised and abused Lucy, the very symbol of their love. Seonmi looked at the utterly drunk Hyami. She had despised Hyami for abusing Lucy, but now realized that Hyami was just another pitiful woman who couldn't win her husband's affection. Seonmi had Hyami sent home. The next day, Taemin called and asked Seonmi out. He begged her to take him back, but Seonmi urged her ex-husband to cherish Hyami instead, because Hyami truly loved him. Taemin, however, refused to return to that vicious woman. He promised to care for Seonmi and the child growing inside her. This time, he wouldn't let his mother hurt Seonmi again. Yet Seonmi had long since lost faith in marriage. She urged her ex-husband not to judge Hyami so harshly. Being a stepmother was undeniably difficult, especially when Hyami not only lacked her husband's affection but also endured constant harassment from her sister-in-law and mother-in-law. It was no wonder her psyche had become twisted. Returning home, Taemin visited Lucy. Lucy, acting like a little adult, advised him to treat Hyami better. Lucy hoped her father could find happiness and didn't want to, through oneself, be the reason for his divorce. Taemin didn't respond, simply returning Lucy to Seonmi. Upon returning, Lucy discovered a pregnancy guidebook in her mother's room. Only then did Lucy realize her mother was expecting. Lucy had always believed her mother's divorce was solely for her sake. Learning of Xianmi's pregnancy now filled Lucy with even deeper guilt. Xianmi hurriedly explained the divorce was due to her husband's betrayal. Not Lucy. Guilt-ridden, Lucy asked, "Will the baby in mom's belly be like me?" Xianmi held Lucy tightly, saying nothing, for she knew this child would be taken away the moment it was born. That night, Lucy suddenly asked Xianmi to send her to her grandparents' house. Forcing a smile, she insisted that she didn't want a little brother or sister. It would be better to live with her grandparents, she said, so Xianmi wouldn't have to worry about herself. She even said coldly that she'd be perfectly happy without Xianmi. Xianmi looked helplessly at Lucy, lost in her own thoughts, and explained again and again that she truly divorced her husband because there was no love left. Lucy didn't believe her, insisting that Xianmi reconcile with her husband. She couldn't let her little brother or sister be born without a father. That day, Xianmi received a call from her father. He threatened that if she was kicked out of the family, he would beat her to death with his own self. It turned out that Xianmi and her mother had lived under her father's beatings and verbal abuse since childhood. Her father, a renowned entrepreneur, presented a polished, polite facade in public. Yet at home, he transformed into a miserly, abusive monster. He would rather donate all his money than leave anything for his only daughter. He frequently took pleasure in beating and berating Xianmi and her mother. Xianmi endured 1 to 2 hours of beatings daily. In high school, he even broke 3 of her ribs, leaving her hospitalized for a year. Her mother bore daily bruises from his abuse. Years of torment had shattered Xianmi's mental state. She believed the only way to make a child obey was to beat her into silence. This was why Xianmi constantly abused Lucy. Her father considered her 2 divorces a disgrace, knowing her father would kill her if he found out. Xianmi clung to her in-laws' home, seeing no hope of reconciling with her husband. Xianmi resolved to flee with her mother to a place her father couldn't find before he came looking. Xianmi withdrew all the money from her bank card, urging her mother to escape with her. But her mother urged her to accept her fate. With her father's status and power, he could easily track them down. What awaited them then would only be more merciless beatings. Taemin overheard Xianmi's phone call by accident. He never imagined the envied heiress of a conglomerate would not only inherit nothing but suffer abuse. As a man, Taemin couldn't stand idly by while Xianmi endured this. He urged Xianmi to calm down, but Xianmi had already lost her mind from fear. Seeing the pitiful Xianmi, Taemin's heart finally softened. These words finally calmed Xianmi's terrified heart. Ultimately, Taemin tracked down Xianmi's father and issued a warning. If he dared to abuse Xianmi or her mother again, Taemin would sue oneself and expose one's sordid deeds. Not only would one ruin the tycoon's reputation, but one would also send oneself to prison. Xianmi's father feared nothing more than having his carefully cultivated image exposed, so he dared not act rashly again. Under her husband's guidance, Xianmi also came to understand that disciplining children with physical punishment was wrong. Filled with remorse, Xianmi apologized to Lucy and received her forgiveness. Xianmi couldn't bring herself to forgive her husband's reckless behavior for the sake of their child. In the end, Xianmi made the heartbreaking decision to give birth and leave the child in her in-laws' care. After Xianmi gave birth to a son, before she could even hold him, her mother-in-law rushed over to take the baby. Learning Xianmi would resume her hosting career after her postpartum confinement, her mother-in-law was deeply displeased. If Xianmi remained a public figure, the child would inevitably discover her true identity. Mrs. Li did not want her grandson to form any attachment to Xianmi. She therefore ordered Xianmi to find a new job. Yet having already lost her child in marriage, Xianmi refused to sacrifice her dreams. She insisted on returning to her hosting career, perhaps clinging to a shred of conscience. Mrs. Li ultimately refrained from interfering with Xianmi's decision. Fighting back tears, Xianmi took one final look at her child. On the way home, Xianmi's mother was heartbroken for her daughter. Forced to be separated from her own flesh and blood, the mother wept the entire journey. Yet the moment Xianmi stepped out of the hospital, she seemed to let go of all feelings for her son. Seeing Xianmi's cold demeanor, her sister and mother couldn't help but rebuke her for being heartless. Yet what mother could truly abandon her own child? Every night, Xianmi wept herself nearly blind with longing for her son. She couldn't understand why. In both marriages where oneself had done nothing wrong, oneself was always the one left wounded. Still, Xianmi dared not show her sorrow, for it would only worry her parents. After learning her brother had been taken, Lucy comforted her mother with quiet kindness. This brought some solace to Seonmi's heart. Seonmi's decision to divorce her husband proved absolutely correct. The moment Soohyun was divorced, he went straight to a female celebrity. Men really are no good. Had Seonmi not divorced him, she would only have been deceived again and again. After losing faith in love, Seonmi poured all her energy into her work. Armed with her beauty and impeccable professional skills, she climbed back to the pinnacle of her career, becoming an enviable powerhouse. Seeing Seonmi throw herself into work, her sister thought she was drowning her sorrows in her career. She urged Seonmi to move on, saying life must go on. Seonmi just smiled and said she had long since let go. She even joked that she'd never trust men again. This was Seonmi's third marriage to oneself. From now on, she would only marry oneself. This way, she wouldn't have to endure her in-laws' harassment or worry about her husband being stolen away. How blissfully free and happy that felt. Truthfully, Seonmi's greatest mistake in life was being love-struck. Had she paused to make a careful choice when she insisted on marrying back then, she might have avoided such agonizing pain. May every young woman, when swept up in love, also think carefully. Don't rush into marriage just because you believe in love. In the end, the one who suffers will only be yourself.